Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 8th edition of the FreeFuse Sessions. I am with Gizelle Hutchinson, one of the folks that I've met through my travels on LinkedIn. And, one of the great parts about LinkedIn, of course, is you can connect with folks all over the world. And well, Giselle's from South Africa, and I've built a really, really cool, online relationship of speaking with her at almost opposite parts of my day. But it's always a fun and engaging conversation. So I'd love to just give you the floor, Gizelle, to tell the folks a little bit more about yourself and what you do, and we can get right into this FreeFuse session interview.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gizelle Hutchinson from South Africa. Disclaimer, I am South African, so I have no filter. What comes out of my mouth is well-intended most of the time, so please take it from where it comes. I am South African born and raised. 2 years ago, actually, I started my own company, GH Skill Solutions, and it's been an amazing experience. I have clients both in South Africa, and in South Africa, the majority of the work is focused around our skills development legislative framework, which is to enable skills development, so above high school, so above basic education, so training and development within the workplace, so to enable the majority of our population who didn't receive very good basic education to enter the world of work. This legislation's been around since the late 90s. And was developed and promulgated after we had our first democratic elections in 1994. Unfortunately, this legislation has led to a lot of, I don't know what the word is, this legislation has a lot of incentives built around it. So it's led to a whole industry being developed around accredited learning and what that looks like and how people get their incentives. I get to do some very, very exciting work with my global clients where we actually work with adult learning more, and we are able to do very exciting stuff. It is a global FMCG, so I do get to work with people all over the world. And as a South African coming from a very multicultural environment, I love it. I love meeting new people. I love learning about their experiences. We have 11 official languages in South Africa. They're busy working on South African Sign Language as being the 12th. So we are, diversity is where we live.
So,
go ahead.
I was
going to say, I do some consulting with other entities on the skills development framework and how it was set up from a structural point of view in South Africa. I think we have some of the greatest legislation in the world when it comes to skills development. I just don't know if we are keeping up with how it needs to be developed and implemented.
Well, thank you for that background. And, I've always appreciated hearing about, some of the initiatives that you have going on in South Africa, of course, and, just all of these, sort of different stories that you've told me. And I always like to touch upon how people got started, what they, on what they're working on right now, right? So you started your company, and have built it up. You now work with international clients. But when you were first getting started, right, and you first said to yourself, I think that I should start this company, what was the onus? Where did it start? And then how did you build that up to being able to service folks all over the world?
What's interesting is I never thought I would work for myself. I worked in government in something called the Sector Education and Training Authority. It's a statutory body that is set up in terms of the Skills Development Act. And I was there for 10 years. I was a government employee. I was in sheltered employment. I was guaranteed an increase every year because it's unionized. And I didn't know if I was ever going to leave. I would still be there. I would probably retire there. But somebody offered me an opportunity. I was offered an opportunity to move out of the public sector into the private sector. And I wanted that opportunity to grow because I could have stayed at the CETA doing the same thing for the next 10 years as well, or I could have taken the leap, which I did. 3 weeks later, COVID hit. So the leap wasn't what I thought it would be. Imagine going from the public sector to the private sector, and 3 weeks later, the whole world shuts down. So I found myself about 8 months later, unemployed and in the middle of COVID wave 1, I think. So I took a couple of months to think, what do I want to do? What's that going to look like? Do I go back to government? Do I try and find a job? And then we arrive. So now we're arriving at about January 2021. Wave 2 COVID is now in South Africa. Looking for work when people are not working, when businesses are not operating, was almost impossible. I am the other side of 45. So it's been about 20 something years since I applied for a job, and all these electronic screening things, and it was exhausting. It wasn't for me. And somebody said to me, why don't you start consulting? People will pay you for what you know. So I just did it. I took the leap, and I made it LinkedIn official. And I think LinkedIn is such a great tool, and I think people underestimate it, and they have quite a narrow view on it. And I think if it wasn't for LinkedIn, we wouldn't have met. And we've had some really interesting conversations, and I'm so glad that we do know each other. And I think this has enabled me to work all over the world. Well, for me to do my work for companies all over the world, I have yet to leave South Africa to go to one of my clients. So it's a complete paradigm shift to where I was before, going into the office, being there before 7, leaving off 7 in the morning, leaving after 7 at night, and being almost chained to my desk, to now being in a place where I'm not even on the same continent as most of my clients. But we found a way to make it work, which I think is very exciting. It's not something pre-COVID we were really getting our heads around. And now for me, it's just a normal day. Like it's how we operate. Also, I have a very big mouth. So I think the minute someone talks to me, they see like I have stuff to talk about.
Well, you know what's so funny about, sort of your story, it kind of like mirrors my own, right? Because I was actually doing like teaching assistant, work at, Texas A&M. And during that time, I was actually working on the whole FreeFuse idea. I've been working on it from like the summer of 2019. We have this idea that we think is going to work. And then, we're getting ready to try and do our first like pilot program and things like that. But then, of course, COVID immediately hits. And funny enough, since all of our stuff is really, sort of remote friendly, of course, being, the sort of platform and, really being cloud-based and everything. I always get this question from folks about, were you able to tell the future? Because you could, you had the system that would have worked so well, and now this remote work is happening, and people really need systems like this, whether it's for training and learning, or even just doing more, kind of like no touch, asynchronous kind of communication. And I always say, you can't really predict a pandemic, but what you can do is adapt to things much more quickly. And, kind of in your own story about how you went from, the public to the private sector, you're looking for work during this time, you adapted really, really quickly. So, if you were, let's just say for folks who are maybe, getting themselves started and trying to figure out, hey, I'm in this position where I have an opportunity to perhaps start something. What are some of your guidance points if you might want to, reflect on what you did before? What's guidance points that you could provide to people maybe trying to take the same journey of building themselves up in an uncertain time for themselves?
I actually thought a lot about this in my first 6 to 8 months when I was working on my own, because the world has changed significantly because of COVID. And I think you're right. I think when people say, oh, you were so clever to do it then, it was the perfect time to do it then, we didn't choose that time. We had done a lot of work in preparation for what we didn't know the future held. And it just so happened the cards fell as they did. And we were able, when I say we, you and I, and people like us, were able to transition into these new areas so quickly. So I think one of the things I did throughout my career is I tried to get as much experience as possible. I grabbed experiences wherever they were. It was often work. Is it breaking up? Is it fine now? Oh. So I often did work that other people didn't want to do. I always put my hand up, and I was always learning new things. And I think that helped me more than picking a career path and going in one straight line. I think what it did is gave me a lot of skills in a lot of different areas. So when I started on my own, I didn't have the money to pay somebody to build a website for GH Skills. I didn't have somebody to do everything. It was me. So what I did was Google's amazing. We underestimate Google what you need to do, follow the steps and get it done. I built a website, I built a LinkedIn page. They don't sound like significant things, but they are, because what they do for potential clients is they give you credibility as a brand. You start to share your thoughts, you start to share a little bit of who you are. I've been told I don't come across like this on LinkedIn. I still have a good LinkedIn following and a great community, but I think I'm a little hyperactive, and that doesn't come across on LinkedIn. And people enjoy that. So yeah, it's not going to give people 100% idea who you are, but you can share what you're interested in, your values, your knowledge, etc. And people are really scared to share on LinkedIn, but you'll be surprised who's watching and you don't even know. A lot of people don't comment. Even the people you want to talk to are not commenting back, but because everyone's afraid of insulting somebody or saying the wrong thing. So we have the two extremes. You've got the people who are trolls and on there to destroy other people, and the people that have value to add are not saying anything because they're scared of the trolls.
And I have to say, something I've always appreciated about you is this authenticity that you have. I mean, I've seen some of the LinkedIn posts that you have, which I think is great, right? Like, I appreciate what you put out there. And I think that, you've built a nice, vibrant community of folks who appreciate you and appreciate the, sort of that personality and character. And I've always felt like LinkedIn profiles, or even just any profile in general, if you're talking about like social media or anything, it's really kind of like a small snippet of what this person cares about. And I think that it's always kind of like a doorway to more. Right? Like there's a doorway to, do I want to know this person in greater detail? Are they interesting? Is there something that I'd like to, sort of, have a conversation about? And I think in the world that we have right now, which, sort of you expounded upon a little bit when you were saying how useful of a tool LinkedIn is, I think that it's becoming so much more common to really network with folks all over the world in other places, just utilizing our online tools and just having just a nice brief, conversation starter, and then, maybe hopping on a call, getting to know each other. And I've gotten really used to that myself, utilizing things like Lunch Club, for example, reaching out to folks on LinkedIn. But there are a lot of people who, when you go out and someone reaches out to you, or, maybe you need to reach out to them, they don't feel comfortable doing that, right? Because they're not used to it. So, obviously that's kind of that's exactly how we met. So, when you're maybe talking to folks for the first time, whether you're meeting them, through maybe a platform, or meeting them through something like a LinkedIn chat or something like that, do you have any kind of insights about maybe how to be more open, or just sort of what you feel like could help people sort of maybe get over that trepidation of, I'm meeting people on the internet?
Yeah, I think you should always have that intimidation, because you never know what you're going to get. But I also think you need to try. You can't say that it hasn't worked if you haven't given it a shot. That's kind of been my ethos through life. Like, give it a try and see where it goes. I do agree with you. I think that social media is a very curated view of a person's life or of a person's situation, and people are able to curate it for you for them to portray who they want to be. And sometimes that can be difficult for people to translate into online, to face, because it is so curated and it's not who they are. I think I have put some things on LinkedIn. I can be, so I go between putting very motivational stuff and then being very honest about life. And I think that's what people appreciate, because one day it'll be like, you've got this. The next day it'll be like, fuck this shit. So I think if you're reading that, and if you're seeing that, I think it's something people can relate to, because we're not all perfect all the time. I mean, my Instagram looks like I live the most amazing life. And I had somebody who said to me, oh my God, your holiday looks so beautiful. I'm like, you only saw the pictures I wanted you to. You didn't see everything else. And I think people forget that. And I think people feel the need to portray something or to be something they're not. And I think if you could just be comfortable in who you are, it enables you to be your authentic self.
What's funny about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think if you go in with good intentions, and you go in with love, you can say almost anything to anybody if they know it comes from a good place. And I always give a disclaimer that I'm South African and I have no filter. Even for South African, I have no filter, and I'm exceptionally loud and exceptionally I I can be outgoing. In this case, I'm outgoing. Let's go with that. But I can have times when I'm not. Like, we all have all of those in us. And I think if you're authentic and if you're yourself, you never have to remember who you were in the last call, because it's always you.
Right.
What were you going to say? Were you going to mention a post?
You know what's funny is I feel like the reason why we get along is that, people describe me as also not having a filter, because I'll just like, sometimes I'll just like say something and I'll be like, you know what, I did not think at all before I said what I just said out loud. and it's not like I'm trying to be mean. I just like, sometimes there's just like a blunt assessment that'll come out like, hey, how did I do? And I'll be like, that was terrible, but here's how you can improve it. Like, there's like a constructive way to go about it, right?
Yeah, and I think if you come from a good place, people know it's not mean, and they know you're not trying to break them down.
Yeah, no, totally. Because it's like, I would rather tell you, like, for example, if you're trying to go do something like important, right? Would you rather have somebody tell you how far you are from making it good than to have someone be like, the mom syndrome or dad syndrome, like, hey, you know what, everything you did looks really good, right? Like, so
The certificate of attendance, right? Like, just go for it. You'll be great. My daughter is autistic, and she went to a remedial school for a long time. She's now in a mainstream high school. She hated that. Like, at the end of the term, people would get certificates for just like, this is the Good Spirits Award, and she'd be like, what are they doing? And she would always get something, and she'd be like,
yeah.
So I think if you're blowing hot air at people's asses, you're not doing them any favors. You're not preparing them for life. And if you really, really care about somebody, you should be able to be honest with them like that and if you come from a place of love, like I said, and if you're authentic self, they'll take it from whence it comes. I live in a very, very culturally mixed country. Working in government, I think not even 10% of us were white within that institution. White people were generally quite nervous. I don't know if you should put this on the internet, actually.
No, I mean, it's a history. It's all good.
I know. So I did. I got along with everyone. And when I left, everyone's like, it's going to be so quiet without you, Gizelle. You need to come in and cheer us up, Gizelle. And it was hard leaving. I have to tell you, leaving a place like that, as tough as it felt like working there, and as terrible as government feels like working in, it felt like I was leaving my family, because I had built these authentic relationships with everyone. And I had a woman once come to me, another white woman who's Afrikaans, and say to me, you can say anything to anyone and no one's offended. If I said that to someone, they would lose their mind. And I can't tell you what it is. There's no direct science to it, but I think it's if you are your authentic self. And if you are honest with people without being, well, I don't think you should concentrate on it. I think if you are your authentic self and you're honest with them for their best interests, there's never malintent behind it. And I think if there is, then you shouldn't, that's not honest, and you should just stop, right?
Yeah. And absolutely. And I think that's kind of why I've for example, right, like, we were talking about sort of people who are, just the general attitude of using social media to portray yourself as somebody else, right? And my favorite thing, my favorite thing is like when you see people who need to make like a commentary about something, and it's just like they want to either do two things. They want to make it about themselves, or they want to make a commentary about it, or show that they're like, in this place of like, oh, I understand, and like I'm this compelling, wise person, or I'm this compelling, compassionate person. The post I got, one post I got which had the most engagement I've ever gotten was just a post just appreciating other people, right? I don't post stuff about let me tell you guys about my opinions about things, because like, of course, like there is a way to build a following, telling people about great insights, and even I know I can be better about it, but I just find sometimes that whole idea of doing so can just feel inauthentic, right? But the most authentic thing I ever did was just say, I would not be here today without the help of so many people, and I am just so grateful for the help that I've received, and I only wish that I can go off and really do the same for others. And just that thought alone, you know, even though it's through this computer interface, through, you know, other people can possibly read it in different ways. I think a lot of people, based on the responses, really felt like, you know what, I can, you know, I can actually understand that experience as well. And I think it's when, you know, if folks are really trying to build things for engagement, so to speak, you know, and not trying to be authentic, I think being authentic really allows people to be part of your experience, and henceforth why it's so important for you to be authentic. Because how much do you really want to live a life, your entire life, of being something that's not you? It's tiring.
It must be exhausting.
Yeah.
It must be exhausting. And I think you're right. So there are people, and I tend to do this, it drives people nuts. Every now and again, I'll do like a thank you for the people for that specific period or that have made an impact. And I think, yeah, I think those messages are important, because not everybody knows how they've impacted you. Not everybody knows how their small little interaction or small behavior has had a massive impact. So I think thanking people and being grateful for what comes your way is great. I wanted to say something just now when we were talking about luck, about yourself and FreeFuse kind of coming, like maturing around the time of COVID. I always want to say I'm lucky, but I'm not, because I worked fucking hard to get here, and so did you. So somebody once told me luck is preparation and opportunity. And I think opportunities will come and go, and you never know what opportunities are going to come your way. But if you are prepared, and if you are working towards something you're passionate in, that it'll find you. It really, really will. I do believe that. In the beginning, you are right. There are people, when I first thought I was going to look for another job, there were so many people that reached out to me, and so many people that just had conversations with me, like, where are you going? What do you want to do? Like, how can we help you? What can we do here? And I'm so grateful for those people. So I think psychologically, I don't know if I had gotten through it without them. And these are people that saw me posting something on social media about, I don't know what those recruitment and algorithm things are called. I don't know, those systems. I don't like them, so I don't want to remember their name. And a lot of people were very supportive around that. And I think somebody once said to me, I was very honest and very raw about the experience. But isn't it weird that we think that is the exception, that people are honest about their experiences? That people can be raw is so shocking to everyone else, because we are so guarded. It's so crazy. And I forgot the other thing I was going to talk about. It doesn't help having ADD. Okay, like there's a million thoughts going on in here, and none of them want to come out at the same time. I mean, they all want to come out at the same time, or they don't want to come out. So there was lack, there was authenticity, there was, I wanted to say, one of my most liked is the wrong word, it's because I'm old, but the reactions that I got, and I think it's at the moment, it's at the top of my profile, it's pinned, is be a nice person. I think it is be a nice person, or be a nice adult.
Person.
Yeah, people are like, be a nice human, not even person. The post is be a nice human, and everybody loved it. Like, are we so terrible that we need to see it somewhere to be like, oh yeah, wait, let me like adjust myself and be a nice person? Like, what the hell? And people reacted to it. So clearly it's a thing. People are. I also do fun things like, so in South Africa, we have lots of issues with our infrastructure. And at some point, this is the one that got the most, my post that got the most reactions. I wrote something to Nespresso about that I really need them to come out with a machine that has a battery, because we have something called load shedding. So it is power cuts, but rolling power cuts since August, and it's different times during the day. And mine is always in the morning. And they do change it, but it's very often in the morning. And I wrote to them saying, dear Nespresso, I would love to have a cup of coffee, but there's no power. Please, can your next machine have a battery? It's people responded, and it was just, the impressions were out of control. It was insane. But I think it's because it's funny, and it's not funny, and it's just so real. It's not everything else you see on LinkedIn. I think people's comments drive me nuts, because all they do is reiterate what they've read. Like, yes, I agree with you because of this. Really? Does that need, like, I don't know if that needs to be a whole conversation. And LinkedIn's algorithms tell you to do it. So if you want to be popular, if you want your dopamine hits for somebody liking what you've done on social media, please follow our rules. And if you don't, then we're not gonna give you airtime, which is bizarre to me. So people comment and people are high-fiving each other in the comments or giving each other the middle finger in the comments and walking away, and there's no value in it, which is crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I often, though, I have to tell you, I often get really angry at posts and I start typing something out. And then I think, I call it the power of the pause. I just wait and I think, do I need to say this? And will the reaction that it garners be worth my energy and my time? And do I want to give it space in my life? And more often than not, I say no, because I have no interest in pulling in trolls or pulling in comments that I'm going to spend all day defending or fighting. And then I delete it. So I think there is ways for people not to be antagonistic. I think sometimes you're going through something, comments, and then people come at you, and yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle, you know?
Yeah.
So I think I do believe you should be spreading love and hope and positivity. And I know we can't all be positive all the time. I have manic depression, not that you would tell, and I have an anxiety disorder, but that doesn't, it can't dictate who I am all the time. And often when I tell people those two things, I don't think I've ever told you that. When I tell people those two things, they're like, no, you're the last person in the world. But those are the exact people who do struggle with it. And I think if I kept myself in that mindset, and if I was only reading negative comments and only making negative comments, I don't do anything for myself or anyone else.
You know, it's really interesting. Well, I want to touch upon really fast about what you said about, you know, increasing the opportunities that you have. And then I do have a really great insight here about what you just said. But I always believe when you're talking about luck, right? Like I always talk about giving yourself as many opportunities. And this is an engineering person in me, but it's always like, I want to try and increase the surface area of my luck. So the more opportunities you have, the more likely you can catch a great opportunity by giving yourself this, you know, whether you want to call it a net, or I always call it kind of like a surface that you can catch something. So I always believe that if I put a lot of feelers out there and I nurture things and I build things up, you know, you have an opportunity to do some really, really great things. So, you know, I totally believe in that. And I believe that you can construct it utilizing, you know, getting yourself out there. And really, you know, quote unquote, luck happens when you've done that preparation and you've given yourself that, you know, ability to get those opportunities as they come. Now, the second item, you know, that you mentioned here as well, thinking about sort of the whole aspect of how people, you know, feeding yourself bad comments or feeding yourself things that aren't uplifting, right? So, you know, and you're right. I've seen it as a consistent trend of folks who, you know, deal with, you know, mental health issues or just have things about their mental health. And it's something that I've always really, you know, kind of wanted to help people through, or, you know, sort of be there for folks, because that's really what a lot of these people really need. They just need somebody to talk to sometimes, or they just need somebody to understand where they're coming from. And something you said about not feeding yourself like these bad comments, because a lot of what I've believed is if you have the mentality to, like, let's say you're angry, you're going to continue looking for stuff to continue being angry about, because it like feeds that cycle, right? And so, you know, what I like to, you know, kind of practice my own like sort of meditation, because my whole thing is getting mad about stuff. Like, you know, sort of that's sort of my thing, is like I can be really sort of intense as it pertains to like working, you know, pretty heavy hours. But a lot of like what will happen sometimes is like I'll see something that makes me, you know, angry. And it's not like, you know, I want to go out there and necessarily do something about it, but it manifests itself in looking at other stuff that like pisses me off. And I'm sometimes thinking to myself, why do I keep looking at stuff like this? Like, for example, if you think about a platform like Twitter, right? Like LinkedIn is more professional, and you can just kind of like stay away from, you know, certain things. And like, you know, even if you write something strange or off-putting, most people will usually be cordial about it, right? With Twitter, you're gonna get people to like crucify you for even the wrong, just writing something.
I'm not on Twitter.
Huh?
Because of that. I'm not on Twitter because of that.
Yeah, well, you know what? Good for you, because Twitter, if there's if there's anything that dispels the idea that people need their problems solved with technology, it's okay. So I talked about this with somebody the other day, and I was like, this is why I don't like going to networking events with like other startup founders, because a bunch of people in the earlier, times, or even people maybe even later stage, you'll go to a network event and people will be like, hey, what do you do, what's your technology, what problem are you solving? And I'm like, are these just like the 3 icebreaker questions? Are you guys like all robots? Like, why don't we just like ask each other like why you started the company, why did it sound like a good idea, why do you care about what you're up to, right? And so
why do we forget we're dealing with human beings? Like, we forget that there's a person in front of us, not the actual company, not the actual startup, right, but a person. So how did this person get you?
Right.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I always care about that element, because I actually care about understanding the person. But I always, you always get this question of what problem are you solving? And, whether you look at stuff like Simon Sinek, where you do the why, how, and what, or, that invert that structure. But to me, I've always felt like what problem are you solving is a good way to like make sure that people don't work on things that don't matter, right? But if I look at something like Twitter is something that I always joke doesn't solve any problems. It creates problems, right? Everything that everybody tweets either can get you canceled, they get other people angry, people spend all day on there and just like literally look for things to be pissed off about, or things to say, oh, you're in my tribe, let me agree with you. And it's like, y'all like live a life that I feel like is exhausting. You're angry all the time. You find things to be angry all the time. And now you have a habit of just being on there and just being a bad person, right? And it's like,
and you will never see South African bought it and made it even worse. So that's not our proudest moment as South Africa. I think Elon Musk buying it and making it into the wild, wild west, where anybody can say anything and do anything, will only make it much worse. I was off it long before Elon, though. I have to be honest. I don't know if I need to know what everybody's thinking 24/7, 365. I feel like Twitter's where people go when they have a thought and they don't want to be alone with that thought, and they kind of put it out there. I was on it for a short while because you could get notifications on water and electricity in Johannesburg. But then, like, it's so random, not even the Twitterverse knows about it. So I think I left it like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer. And I don't miss it. From what I've heard, it's getting worse. I'm glad I'm not there. I have no interest in doing it. I know a lot of companies move to it, but I'm not a fan. And I don't want to go anywhere where there's more nonsense, because I'd like to reduce the amount of nonsense in my life if possible.
Yeah,
there's so much else going on in life. Like, we're living through a world war, in my opinion. What's happening in Europe, the whole world is involved. And if that doesn't strike you as these are not normal times and we should be being even more human with each other, I don't know. And if those people that disagree with me on Twitter, they can stay on Twitter. We'll each stay in our lane and we'll live our lives. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I have a funny story, right? So I'm your classic lurker on Twitter, right? I don't really like to comment because, number one, I like to look at myself as sort of the person who watches things unfold on the world stage on that platform. I'm happy to participate on LinkedIn because, like, for myself, I like to have, like, I don't just like to look at it as professional networking, but I actually use that to like help build some really fulfilling relationships. And you can have fulfilling relationships in business that aren't necessarily, just only friendships, and you can make friends out of folks you work with in business, et cetera, et cetera. Now,
Twitter, some of my oldest friends are people that I started working with. I have to be honest. I'm not going to lie. It's like, I think as adults, that's where you make your friends. You make your friends at work and through your children's friends' parents.
Yeah. But see, what I like about LinkedIn is that I feel like it's easier not to become tribal, right? Whereas Twitter is literally created for people to gather together and basically become the Montagues and the Capulets, right? Like, basically like having two sides of people and polarizing them as much as you possibly can. I think it's a function of how actually the structure of the comments work. That's been my thesis about why that is. But I'll tell you an interesting development. So If you're not familiar, Silicon Valley Bank, they go down, you know, obviously last
that
Friday.
That even made the news, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, so Silicon Valley Bank goes down. It's like tech Armageddon, right? It's like, you know, tech Armageddon. And what, you know, sort of tech has kind of traditionally been seen as, especially if you're talking about Silicon Valley, is more of kind of like a left-leaning sort of, you know, a left-leaning sort of focus to how they, you know, politically look at the world. Now, what was interesting though, is that what I found was, rather than people who were formally together when it pertained to voting for certain people, right? They were voting for certain people. Everybody was up in arms. Yeah, like we got our candidate into, you know, in as president, blah, blah, blah. Now, 3 years later, we're talking about these people, you know, Silicon Valley Bank goes down, and you have a swath of people who were formerly hand in hand with you maybe 3 years ago, now grabbing the pitchforks and saying, oh, we need to let the bank go under and all the tech startups, because they're literally just like, you know, they're literally just like these entities that, you know, are basically just kind of like mooching off the rest of us. And if we bail them out, it's the American taxpayer and all this other things that are, you know, happening. And I'm like, you guys need to understand, like, there seemed to have been this kind of misconception, I feel like, of people thinking that they were allies in one area, but now that, you know, it's something that doesn't affect some of these other people, but they think it adversely affects them. Now it feels like, oh, we don't have any allies, right? And it's so interesting.
How much thought and how much research, these people that are now saying, let them go down, let it sink, how much thought and how much research into all of this do you think that they've done?
Probably
like, are they subject matter experts? No. They just would like to have an opinion, and would like to be seen to have an opinion. I'm not going to lie. I know nothing about banking. I tried. It sounds terrible, but I know nothing about banking. So I can't tell you about how a bank succeeds or not, or any of that. What I can tell you is what I've read in the press. I'm always hesitant to trust what's in the press, because it's always written from somebody else's perspective. It's not necessarily always the truth. But I think it's very short-sighted in terms of saying, so there's a couple of things in terms of Silicon Valley and it's mooching off the people. And if it wasn't for Silicon Valley, where would the States be in the knowledge economy?
Right.
Silicon Valley has contributed. We would not be having this conversation if it wasn't for you guys.
Nope.
Like, there's a whole bunch that wouldn't be happening. There's a reason everywhere in the world the governments are trying to emulate Silicon Valley. Banks, and from what I understand, it was a crypto bank. Is that correct?
No, I believe that either First Republic or Signature Bank was more along the lines, or maybe it was one of the other ones. I can't remember. But Silicon Valley Bank, so their whole thing their whole thing is not that they think of it wasn't the FTX problem, right? The FTX problem was that it was literally illiquid. What happened was, because the actual bonds that they bought were maturing at 1% yield every year, the government was releasing ones at 5%. Therefore, the ones at 1% basically lost tons of value. So therefore, the value of all those things that were actually where people's money was tied in so that they could appreciate, basically, right? So if you think about it, the problem wasn't actually that it didn't have money. The problem was that the instruments that they put their money in basically became less, not worthless, but worth less, right? Like, not having zero value, but like actually
like
worth
the
less.
Rand.
Right.
Like the Rand is worth 20
like
Swiss francs to the Rand. 2 years ago it was 15. I get it.
Yes, right. And in the 90s, the Rand was comparable to the dollar, right? So,
I know. Like, what did we do?
So if you think about it, right, if a bunch of people then see that their actual money is being put in a place where it's not actually maturing as fast as they hope it is, and that, you know, actual structure is making the, you know, worth of those instruments less, what ended up happening is people found this out, was they actually started to just start taking their money out because it's not worth it to keep it in that institution. Now, the thing about Silicon Valley Bank that a lot of people might not know is that there was a considerable amount of deposits that were not FDIC insured. FDIC insurance actually means that you have it up to 250,000 USD, you know, basically insured or protected. Anything larger than that is actually not insured by the FDIC, right? So In fact, Silicon Valley Bank had a considerable number of accounts that had greater than 250,000 in their accounts. Because guess what? It's a bank that a lot of venture capitalists use, startups that actually were told, to go ahead and use that bank from other startups. It's been a partner in the Silicon Valley and startup ecosystem for generations. And what ended up happening was a few people got wind of this item and that these things were essentially becoming, worth less. And the bank run started to happen, right? And then, of course, when a bank run happens, now you don't have an insolvency issue anymore, which is really what kind of like FTX is, right? You actually had you actually now have a real illiquid insolvency issue. So now, people can't just withdraw everything from the bank, because guess what? A bunch of it's actually tied up in other things. So it was a situation of somewhat mismanagement. There's a situation of also kind of some sketchy parts of the folks who were actually running the bank, who sold their shares 2 or 3 weeks before the bank collapsed, which is really sketchy. So there's a lot of items here contributing to an overall sort of bank run in the situation. But for people to not realize that the bank isn't just a bank for VCs and startups and large money accounts, you have normal people who lose all of their money, and you're telling these people to shove it, right? Like that. If you want to talk about being kind to folks, be compassionate to the fact that there's companies and people's dreams going down the toilet. There's literally people who believed in, what they were putting in money into, and now that could all be gone. And it was just kind of disgusting.
People think they have nothing. Imagine one day waking up and everything you worked so hard for, the life you built for you and your family, and everything you've done is gone, and you have no backup plan. That is devastating. And then these people must go onto Twitter to see the rest of America telling them that they deserve it. No, that's not okay. But I think, I don't want to get into American politics, but you guys got a lot of issues to work through. And I think I've said this to you before, I think there's still a lot that needs to happen in the US in terms of equality across the board. And I think there's a come to Jesus moment that's supposed to happen for a lot of Americans. I say this with all due respect. I come from a country that has an horrific past. I grew up under the apartheid government. My first time I could vote was in the first democratic elections in South Africa, which is amazing. I think we spoke about this last time. For us, it felt like it was the 60s. It was a summer of love. We were leaving school and we were free, and you could love who you wanted. You could live where you wanted. You could work with who you wanted. But there was a lot of stuff from our history that we had to deal with and that we're still dealing with. Next year is 30 years and we're still dealing with it. And it doesn't go away. It's something you have to constantly work on. But I think if you're in denial, and I think when you start banning books, I'm going to get controversial, and I don't want to get controversial. And if you start telling people how they should think and where they should get the information for how they think, it's very dangerous territory. Very, very dangerous territory. And when you're infringing on a woman's reproductive rights, on her body, and when you're infringing on a host of different things, let's not get into it. I said I don't want to get political, but I think America needs to take a step and just look at what's going on around them. We live in a multicultural world. I think everybody is, everybody's got their blinders on. I think you don't know what you don't know. And if you're not facing what's happened in the past and working at making it better for the future, for your kids, for your own future, for where you retire one day, it's not going to help. I have to say I have a massive problem with the guns in America. Like the number one killer of children in America is gun violence. How crazy. I heard that this week. It's not cancer. It's not anything else. It's guns. And I live in a very violent country. Okay, I don't come from the Nordic countries. I'm not coming from Sweden or something where everything is milk and honey. I think I live in a very violent country. I know our crime is out of control. The corruption in our country is out of control. And I think what holds it together is that South Africans ever optimistic hope that we can fix it. We really do think we can fix it. We're like, we'll get through this. Let's just keep working. Let's build things around it. But guns are something that is scary. I don't have one in my home. Most of my friends don't have them. And Americans have multiple guns at home. And then you mix that with mental health issues, and you mix that with, oh, hold on, I have to move. Sorry. Can we press pause? My battery's running out.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, where were we?
Yeah, well, no, we were talking about a little bit, you know, sort of about the whole Silicon Valley Bank situation, and you know, sort of, you know, some of the things that you've seen. So,
yeah. So I think we were at the guns. I like that has to stop. I think it's tough, I suppose. I think it's so easy to sit somewhere else and to say what people need to do and what they should do. And I think if you haven't had a lot of varied experiences in your life, it's very difficult to comment. But as somebody who comes from a really violent country, and I've had various violent crimes committed against me, and have had a gun in my face, have had to run away from a hijacker, have had a home invasion. These are not things people normally have all over the world. But these are things South Africans have on multiple events. Guns, if I had a gun, it would complicate things. Somebody would get hurt. And I think, yeah, that's just my opinion. I know it's a constitutional right in America. Your constitution was written when people literally had musket guns. They weren't written for automatic rifles. But it's scary. I can't imagine raising children there with that. But anyway, let's get back to something more interesting than my opinion on guns. Learning and development.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you know, as much as I would love to, you know, continue obviously this conversation, and we'll probably want to have you back like for a second round, you know, after we've had some other interviews as well. But you know, I do want to give you, well, I do want to give you the opportunity, of course, to you know, share anything that you'd like to share with the audience, or you know, anything that you feel like you'd like to, you know, sort of maybe promote. So I always like to, you know, take the last part of the FreeFuse session to allow the folks who come on as guests to, you know, share anything they'd like. So I'll give you the floor, and if there's anything you want to share, please do.
So I think from a GH Skills perspective, we are focusing on how people learn. It's a book my friend wrote, but anyway, plug for Nick Shackleton-Jones. So what we're trying to do is see. So I have a fascination with learning. I have a daughter who's autistic. She had communication development delays, and then a whole bunch of learning. We call them barriers to learning. The rest of the world calls them disabilities. I don't know, whatever you want to call them. I have a fascination with how she learns and how to empower her to learn in the way she learns. And I think the same can be translated for adults. I think if we know by now that how we learn at school doesn't really work. Rote learning doesn't really work. So how do we find ways that does help people learn? And I think earlier on I spoke about how I was able to work or to find work as a consultant because I'd done so many things. So GH Skills is really about how do we help organizations empower their people to empower the organization. And my new word is, and I can't think of what it is, it's my brand new word. So I've written 2 articles this month around accessibility. Accessibility is very close to my heart because of my daughter. She is 15 now. In a couple in South Africa means a few. A couple in the rest of the world means 2. So not in 2 years. In a few years, she'll be entering the world of work. What does that look like for her? And I think, I taking it upon myself to make it a better world for people like Hannah, and make it more inclusive. So GH Skills is here to help whoever is on that journey. We, I don't know, I'm terrible at selling myself. We do project management, we do relationship management, we do learning design, we do curriculum development, content development, legislative, consulting. So we do just about anything. We're a great partner to have in your L&D team. Do you know what Sports Billy is in the US? It was a European cartoon when I was growing up. We didn't get a lot of TV in South Africa back then because a lot was censored, but we got Sports Billy. And Sports Billy had a bag. And whenever he needed something, he'd go into, similar to Mr. Gadget, I think, go into his bag and pull out what he needed and solve a problem. And the clients once called me the Sports Billy. Like, you come to me with an L&D problem and you need a solution, and I will go into my bag, come out with a solution. So it's almost like a bespoke another word she uses is pivot. It's a bespoke solution, and we can pivot to whatever our clients need. We are always open to learning, which is always interesting because consultants come to you with the assumption that they know everything. We come to you with a blank slate. So what is it that you need? What is it direction are you looking in? This is what we know and this is what we can offer. Let us go do some research and we'll let you know what else there is. So I don't know. I don't know if that's clear enough.
Oh, it's clear.
Also, okay. No. Also, whoever wants to know anything more, you are welcome to come on over to LinkedIn. I'm there quite often.
Well, thanks, Gizelle. And I got to say, I appreciate you for being on the show. It's always a lively conversation. So I'm glad that we were able to take the time to do this.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.
And it's always nice to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. So for those out there, we thank you for tuning in. Appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you next time for the next FreeFuse Sessions. Have a great rest of your day.